The air was sharp enough to slice skin. Wind howled through the Norwegian mountains, clawing across the frozen ridges like something alive, something ancient. Snow churned in spirals that danced and then vanished into the black void above. Beneath that silence, something moved. Dr. Nora Haugstad brushed a layer of frost from her goggles and squinted into the storm. Seismic activities off the charts, she said into her comms, voice trembling, not from the cold, but from what she felt vibrating in the ground. The tremors weren't random, they had rhythm. Like a pulse. Like a heartbeat. Andreas, her assistant and closest friend, glanced at the monitor attached to his arm. The readings flickered madly in the screen's pale glow. That's no fault line. It's moving, east. Toward us. Captain Chris folded his arms, his weathered face unreadable beneath the thick frost on his beard. You're saying the ground itself is walking? He asked, half mocking, half afraid. Nora didn't answer. She couldn't. Because deep down, she already knew. 2 years ago, she stood in this same range when they'd found the remains of something enormous, a fossilized skull the size of a van, etched with strange runes no geologist could explain. The government had sealed the site, claiming it was a hoax. But Nora knew better. Trolls weren't just bedtime stories told to keep children from wandering into the woods. They were real. Once, they had ruled these mountains before they vanished, or so people thought. Now, the mountain was waking. The ground rumbled harder, dislodging a cascade of ice from the cliffs above. The team stumbled as the snow cracked like glass beneath their boots. A fissure tore through the landscape, splitting open like a mouth screaming from the earth. From deep below came a sound that froze them all, a low, guttural groan that vibrated in their bones. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't rock. It was alive. Back to the crawler. Chris barked, grabbing his rifle and pushing Andreas toward the armored snow vehicle. Nora hesitated, staring into the growing chasm. The sound was calling her, whispering her name beneath the storm. Nora. Her breath hitched. Did you hear that? Andreas turned. Hear what? But she didn't reply. Because the voice came again, clearer this time, echoing through the wind. You found us once, now wake us again. Her legs moved on their own, taking her closer to the edge. The fissure glowed faintly from below, an eerie green luminescence pulsing like veins through the ice. Something massive shifted beneath the surface, shaking the mountain to its core. And then, silence. The kind of silence that's too perfect, too still, too wrong. Nora crouched near the edge. Her gloved hand brushed the ice and it hissed, steam curling around her wrist. The temperature was rising fast. The ice melted beneath her touch, exposing dark stone covered in strange carvings. They weren't random, they were faces. Dozens of them. Twisted, petrified human faces. Trapped in the mountain skin, their mouths open in silent screams. And one of them moved. A crack split through the ice, snaking across the carved faces. The eyes within began to roll, their frozen pupils flicking toward her. Andreas shouted her name, but before she could react, the ground exploded. A wall of ice and debris shot into the air, throwing Nora backward. She hit the ground hard, her vision blurring with snow and dirt. The crawler's floodlights cut through the chaos, and that's when they saw it. Something massive rose from the depths, shedding boulders and slabs of ice like dead skin. It towered higher than any creature Nora had ever imagined, an abomination of stone, moss, and flesh, its skin glowing faintly with that same green light. Its eyes opened, twin orbs burning like molten emeralds. The troll had awakened. Chris opened fire. The bullets pinged uselessly off the creature's hide, sparks vanishing in the snowstorm. Andreas scrambled for the seismic scanner, shouting data that made no sense. It's growing stronger, the readings are spiking, it's feeding off the mountain itself. The troll turned its head slowly, the movement sending tremors through the ground. Its gaze locked onto Nora. She felt it, not just in her mind, but in her soul. A presence older than time, hungry and hateful, pressing against her thoughts. You shouldn't have come back. The voice wasn't outside her, it was inside. She stumbled to her feet, clutching the ancient pendant around her neck, a relic from the last expedition, etched with the same symbols found on the fossil. The troll's growl deepened. Its hand, a mountain of rock and sinew, rose from the snow. Nora screamed as it came down, smashing into the crawler. Metal twisted like paper, flames erupting into the dark. Chris shouted orders through the chaos, dragging Nora and Andreas into the snow trench. The air reeked of burning fuel and ozone. We need air support. Now. Chris yelled into his radio. But the signal was dead. The storm grew heavier, swallowing their voices. The last thing Nora saw before the smoke engulfed them was the troll turning its face to the mountains above, as if listening to something unseen. And from deep beneath the snow, she heard another heartbeat. There was more than one. The mountains were waking. And Norway was about to burn. Snow drifted in pale sheets across the ruined camp. The silence that followed the destruction was suffocating, thick, heavy, almost sacred. Nora's ears rang with the echo of her own heartbeat as she dragged herself from the trench, her gloved fingers trembling. The air was filled with ash, steam, and the sickening scent of melted metal. The crawler was gone. Nothing remained but burning fragments scattered across the snow. Andreas knelt beside her, coughing violently, his goggles shattered and face streaked with soot. "Chris, where's Chris?" he rasped. Nora turned toward the wreckage. Captain Chris lay half-buried under a twisted panel of the vehicle's frame, motionless. She stumbled to him, pulling with all her strength. The weight was unbearable, metal fused with ice. When she finally freed him, he gasped, blood running down his temple. "Stay still," Nora said, pressing a hand against his chest. His eyes fluttered open. "It's not just one," he whispered. "There's more." The wind howled as if agreeing. From somewhere deep in the valley below, a second roar thundered through the mountains. It wasn't a sound that belonged in this world, it was primal, echoing through the snow like the death cry of the earth itself. Andreas looked toward the horizon, where the ridges shifted under the storm's fury. "We need to move, now. That thing, those things, are waking up." Nora nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on the mountain where the troll had emerged. In the distance, the colossal figure was moving, slow, deliberate, each step sending avalanches tumbling from the peaks. The ground trembled with its rhythm. The legends had called them the stone gods, guardians forged from earth and shadow, born to cleanse the land when humanity's greed grew too great. Old tales told in whispers, stories meant to keep miners and explorers from delving too deep. Nora used to laugh at those bedtime myths. Not anymore. She adjusted the pendant around her neck, the ancient artifact glowing faintly now, reacting to the creature's presence. The runes shimmered in strange, shifting patterns. "What is that thing?" Andreas asked, catching his breath. "Not a fossil," Nora murmured. "A key. A link to whatever sealed them before." A low hum vibrated through the pendant, as if it recognized her words. Suddenly, the air shimmered, a wave of energy rippled across the snowfield. The mountains moaned again. And then the second one appeared. It rose from the opposite ridge, a hulking shape made of rock, roots, and bones, its mouth lined with jagged stone teeth. Its roar tore through the valley, answering the first troll like a call to war. Andreas stumbled back. "God help us." "No," Nora said, eyes wide, voice trembling. "No God can help us now." She helped Chris to his feet. His uniform was torn, his arm hanging limp. "We need higher ground," he said, scanning the terrain through squinting eyes. "If they're coming from both sides, we're trapped." Nora's mind raced. "Not if we go under." Andreas blinked. Under? You mean back into the fissure? It's where this started, she replied. If the pendant reacts to them, there's something beneath us, something they fear or something that controls them. Chris grunted in pain. Or something worse. Still, they moved, 3 fragile humans beneath the breath of ancient gods. They descended into the fissure, ropes anchored to cracked boulders, the glow from Nora's pendant lighting their way. The deeper they went, the warmer it became. The walls pulsed faintly, veins of green energy weaving through the rock like living roots. The sound of stone grinding against stone echoed behind them. Andreas froze. It's following us, he whispered. Nora turned. A shadow loomed at the mouth of the fissure, a colossal arm reaching down, claws scraping across the stone. She felt its heat even from meters away. The troll's eye filled the opening, burning with ancient hatred. Move! Chris shouted. They slid deeper into the dark, the narrow path collapsing behind them as the troll's hand smashed through the rock. The tremor threw Nora against the wall, her pendant clanged against stone, sending sparks into the darkness. And then, light. The tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber. Pillars carved with runes surrounded a central altar, and in its heart stood a monolith, taller than any man, black as night, inscribed with spiraling symbols that pulsed in sync with her pendant. Andreas approached cautiously. What is this place? Nora's voice cracked. The burial ground. Where they were imprisoned. Chris raised his flashlight, scanning the chamber. The carvings showed men bowing to towering figures, the trolls, offering sacrifices of fire and blood. And at the top of the mural, a warning. When the mountain bleeds, the gods return. The hum from the pendant grew louder. The monolith began to vibrate. Cracks of light formed along its surface, green fire seeping through. Andreas stepped back. Nora, what did you do? I didn't, she started, but the floor began to shake violently. Dust and shards of stone rained from above. The fissure behind them split open wider. Through it, a monstrous roar thundered down the tunnel. The troll was coming. Nora gripped the pendant and shouted, "Stop!" And then everything went white. A shockwave burst from the monolith, throwing all 3 of them to the ground. For a heartbeat, there was silence. And in that silence, a voice echoed, not from the air, but from within the earth itself. You cannot stop what was promised. The stone gods rise again. The light faded. The monolith's runes now burned with life. And far above, on the surface, 5 more mountains began to move. The silence that followed the blast was unnatural, thick, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. Nora's body trembled as she rose from the icy floor, dust and debris still raining from the ceiling. Her ears rang. Her lungs burned. The monolith loomed in front of her, no longer black but pulsing with veins of blinding green light that illuminated the cavern like ghostly fire. Andreas groaned beside her, blood trailing down his cheek. Tell me that was an earthquake, he muttered, his voice shaky. Chris coughed and stumbled upright, gripping his rifle. No. That was a warning. The light from the monolith grew brighter. The runes on its surface began to shift, forming words Nora could almost read. Not modern language, something older, carved from myth itself. Her pendant responded, glowing in rhythm, connecting to it like a heartbeat syncing with its twin. She stepped closer. It's alive. The air grew warmer. The ice on the walls melted into rivulets, steaming as it ran into the cracks below. Then the runes burned brighter, rearranging again. This time, Nora recognized one symbol, Bofjel. Blood Mountain. And suddenly, she understood. This isn't just a prison, she whispered. It's a womb. Andreas froze. What? They weren't buried here to die, Nora continued. Her voice trembled as she realized the truth. They were sealed here to regrow. To sleep until the world was weak enough for them to return. Chris gritted his teeth. Then you just sounded the damn alarm. The floor beneath them rumbled violently. Cracks raced through the stone, opening like the veins of some colossal creature. Heat blasted upward, and from the walls came a sound that didn't belong to any human throat, a deep, ancient growl echoing from within the rock itself. The runes flared once more. Then, one by one, the carved faces on the walls began to move. Their eyes rolled open, stone lids grinding apart, mouths stretching in silent agony. Andreas stumbled back, screaming. The petrified faces began to twist, melt, and reform. Limbs pushed through the rock. Shapes took form, half human, half stone, crawling out of the mountain skin like newborns tearing free from a womb of earth. "Oh, my God," Chris whispered, firing a round into one. The bullet ricocheted uselessly. The creature turned toward him, its mouth cracking open to reveal jagged, obsidian teeth. It moved fast. Faster than something its size should. Chris swung the rifle like a club, striking its face. The impact sent vibrations through his arms, as if he'd hit solid granite. The creature snarled, grabbed him by the chest, and hurled him into the cavern wall. "Chris!" Nora screamed. The sound drew the others toward her. The creature's eyes burned with the same green glow as the monolith, their movements jerky and unnatural, like puppets controlled by invisible strings. Andreas fired his flare gun into the nearest one's face. The flare embedded deep, bursting into blinding light. The troll shrieked. Its body cracking apart under the flare's heat. The pieces didn't fall, they melted into glowing dust, absorbed by the monolith. The others froze momentarily, their heads turning toward the monolith like worshippers before a god. Nora understood then, they weren't individuals. They were extensions of it. Fragments of its will. She reached for her pendant, holding it high. The glow intensified. The creatures flinched back, their roars blending into one tortured, collective scream. The energy pouring from the pendant seemed to push them away, until one of them, larger and darker than the rest, stepped forward. It spoke. Its voice was like cracking mountains, low and thunderous. "You carry the mark of the betrayer." Nora's blood ran cold. "The what?" The creature's glowing eyes burned into her soul. "The one who sealed us, your blood, carries her curse." Images flashed in Nora's mind, a woman draped in furs, standing before the same monolith centuries ago, chanting as the trolls were consumed by light. That woman's face mirrored her own. "My ancestor," she whispered. "She imprisoned you." The troll's massive head tilted. "And now you free us." It lunged. Nora dove aside as its claws smashed into the ground where she'd stood, shattering rock. The pendant blazed, sending a shockwave through the cavern that hurled the creature backward. "Run!" she screamed. Andreas grabbed Chris's arm, pulling him toward a narrow tunnel leading deeper into the mountain. They stumbled through it, chased by the thunderous sound of pursuit. The walls glowed with green veins, lighting their path like veins of living fire. The tunnel curved downward, ending in a narrow passage that opened into a hollow chamber filled with strange crystalline structures. Each one pulsed faintly, like beating hearts. Andreas gasped. "Are those?" "Troll eggs," Nora said, horror thick in her voice. "Thousands of them." Chris, still bleeding but conscious, spat blood. "If those hatch, they'll burn Norway to the ground." The sound of pursuit was growing louder. Nora clutched the pendant, her mind racing. There had to be a way to stop it, to stop them. She looked at the eggs. Then at the pendant. Then back at the monolith's distant glow bleeding through the cracks. "Maybe we don't have to stop it," she said, her voice trembling. "Maybe we can control it." Andreas stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Control it?" "Nora, this isn't a weapon, it's a curse." "Every curse has a counterspell," she whispered. "We just have to find it." The ground rumbled again, louder now. The trolls were coming. Chris reloaded his weapon, grimacing. Then you'd better hurry, Doc. Because hell's coming through that tunnel. Nora's pendant pulsed faster, its light syncing perfectly with the eggs around her. For the first time, she felt something different in the energy. Not anger. Not hunger. Something else. Something alive. The trolls roared from the darkness. The eggs pulsed in answer. And in that terrible moment, Nora realized the truth. The eggs weren't waiting to hatch. They were listening. The air inside the crystal chamber pulsed like a living lung. The walls glowed with soft, rhythmic light, steady, deliberate, like heartbeats in unison. Nora stood frozen, her pendant blazing against her chest. Every pulse from it seemed to ripple through the air, awakening something ancient in the stone around her. Andreas stared at the glowing eggs, his voice trembling. They're responding to you. Nora's fingers tightened around the pendant. No, they're responding to my blood. Captain Chris limped closer, face pale beneath his frostbitten skin. You're saying you're connected to them? That thing back there called you the betrayer. What the hell does that mean, Nora? Her eyes drifted across the chamber walls. They were etched with murals, scenes of war, gods of stone, and humans kneeling beneath their massive feet. One image stood out, a woman with eyes like fire standing atop a cliff, pendant raised, commanding the trolls to fall. The trolls weren't monsters then, they were soldiers. Protectors. My great ancestor, Nora whispered, tracing the figure with her gloved hand. Astrid Haugstad. The myths say she sealed the trolls after they turned on their creators. But what if she didn't destroy them? What if she enslaved them? The chamber seemed to react to the word. The crystals flared brighter, the ground humming beneath them. Andreas stepped back nervously. Nora, whatever she did, I think we're repeating it. Then came the sound, soft at first, like the crackling of ice splitting, but it grew louder, sharper. One of the crystalline pods shuddered, its shell splitting down the middle. Oh no, Chris whispered, raising his weapon. The shell burst open. Steam poured out, hot and foul. A shape unfolded inside, smaller than the mountain trolls, but humanoid, its skin translucent and veined with green fire. Its eyes opened slowly, glowing faintly. It turned its head toward Nora, not in rage, but in recognition. It knows you, Andreas breathed. Nora took a step forward despite the terror clawing at her chest. Can you understand me? She whispered. The creature blinked, its movements slow, unsteady, like something reborn after centuries of sleep. Its mouth opened, and a voice like grinding stone rasped out, broken but intelligible. You carry her mark. The blood of the first light. The first light? Nora asked. The creature's voice trembled. When the sky was fire and the world was soft, the stone gods were made from the heart of the mountain, and bound by the blood of man. Your ancestor was our keeper. Until she betrayed the oath. Chris frowned. Oath? The creature's gaze turned to him, glowing brighter. Man promised worship. We gave protection. But when your kind dug too deep, seeking the fire that made us, your ancestor turned our gift into chains. Her blood sealed us beneath the mountains, and her descendants carried the key. Nora's stomach turned. The realization hit her like ice. Then the pendant. Is her curse. The creature said. Your blood awakens us. Your fear feeds us. The creature's voice twisted, deepened, anger bleeding through its tone. Its glowing veins flared red. You cannot unmake what was sworn in blood. The air changed, electric, burning. The pendant seared against Nora's chest, its glow intensifying until it hurt to look at. The other eggs began to crack, one by one, a chorus of splitting crystal echoing through the cavern. Andreas pulled Nora back. We have to go. Now. But before they could move, the entire chamber convulsed. The walls split open, releasing steam and molten light. The newborn trolls began to stir, hundreds of them, emerging in grotesque, half-formed shapes. Some crawled, others stumbled upright, their eyes searching blindly. Nora stumbled toward the nearest exit tunnel, dragging Chris by the arm. Andreas fired his flare gun into the ceiling, hoping to draw attention away, but the creatures didn't chase, they just watched. Watched her. Every single one of them turned to face Nora, their glowing eyes flickering in eerie synchronization with her pendant. What do they want? Andreas shouted. Nora stopped. She knew. The truth hit her like a hammer. They want me, she whispered. They want the blood that bound them. Behind them, a deep rumble shook the cavern. The monolith's glow from the previous chamber intensified, spilling green fire through the cracks. The entire mountain groaned as if alive, shifting under their feet. Chris gritted his teeth. If this mountain collapses, the whole valley's gone. Nora looked back at the sea of awakening creatures, then down at the pendant pulsing in her hand. If I destroy this, she said quietly, maybe it ends. Andreas stared at her, horrified. You don't even know what it'll do. I know it's killing everything around us, she said. If this was Astrid's curse, then breaking it might be the only way to stop them. The floor cracked open beneath them. Molten light surged upward. The newborn trolls wailed, a sound so loud it pierced the soul. Nora raised the pendant high, her voice trembling but fierce. Astrid Haugstad sealed you once. But I am not her. She slammed the pendant against the crystal altar. The explosion was instant, a shockwave of white fire that consumed the entire chamber. Andreas screamed her name. Chris threw himself over her, shielding her from the blast. When the light faded, the crystals were blackened, their glow extinguished. Silence fell. The newborn trolls stood frozen, petrified mid-scream, turned back to stone. And for one fleeting second, Nora thought it was over. Then, deep within the walls, something laughed. The voice was ancient, booming, filled with malice and triumph. You freed us from her curse, and bound us to your blood instead. The mountain shuddered violently. Far above, the peaks erupted in green flame as the true giants, the stone gods, rose in unison, their eyes blazing against the storm. And this time, they weren't waking from imprisonment. They were answering a call. Nora's call. The storm above Norway had turned from grey to green. Lightning flickered unnaturally, branching like veins across the night sky. The mountains, those ancient, silent sentinels, were moving. Whole ridges cracked open like eggs, spilling fire and dust into the frozen valleys below. From deep within those ruptures came the sound, the low, thunderous rumble of stone grinding against stone. It wasn't just tremors this time. It was breathing. Nora staggered to her feet at the mouth of the fissure, gasping in the freezing wind. Below her, the entire valley was alight, rivers of molten fire spilling from the peaks as 6 colossal shapes rose from the earth. Their silhouettes blotted out the moon, their eyes burning with that same poisonous green glow. The stone gods had awakened. And they were angry. Chris leaned heavily against a boulder, his shoulder dislocated, his face pale but his voice steady. You did it, document. You broke the seal. They're loose. Nora's heart pounded. I didn't free them. I called them. Andreas turned to her, his face lit by the glow of the burning sky. Called them? What are you saying? The pendant, she whispered, clutching the scorched relic still hanging around her neck. It didn't destroy their bond, it replaced it. They're bound to me now. And as if to prove her words true, one of the giants, its massive head crowned with icicles and horns of jagged rock, turned toward her. Its eyes narrowed, its movements slow, deliberate. When it spoke, the air itself seemed to tremble. Blood of the betrayer, now queen of ruin. The sound drove her to her knees. The creature's voice wasn't just heard, it was felt, vibrating inside her skull. Andreas raised his rifle out of instinct, but the sight of the monster made his arms drop. How the hell do we stop something like that? Chris's voice was grim. We don't. We survive it. He pointed toward the valley below, where the military convoys had arrived, columns of armored vehicles, floodlights cutting through the snowstorm. Helicopters circled above, their searchlights sweeping across the peaks. Then the first missile launched, an orange streak tearing through the sky. It hit one of the giants square in the chest. The explosion lit up the night. For a moment, it seemed to work, until the flames cleared. The troll barely flinched. It turned its head toward the direction of the strike, eyes flaring brighter, and roared, a sound so powerful the shockwave shattered the glass of the nearest helicopter, sending it spiraling into the valley. And then the others moved. The mountains themselves seemed to walk. Avalanches thundered down the slopes as the trolls tore through the terrain. One reached out and grabbed a tank like a toy, crushing it effortlessly in its rocky palm before hurling it into another vehicle. Fire bloomed across the snow. Nora stumbled backward, covering her ears as the screams of soldiers echoed from below. "This is my fault," she whispered. "They're answering to me. They're killing because I let them wake." Chris grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her hard. "Then you have to end it. Find a way to undo whatever that pendant did." She looked down at it. The relic pulsed faintly, its light weaker now, but still alive. "If destroying it bound them to me," she murmured, "maybe dying will set them free." Andreas froze. "Nora, don't you even." But before he could finish, the mountain groaned again. One of the giants was climbing toward them, its enormous hand digging into the slope, leaving craters where its fingers struck. Its roar shook the ridge, sending chunks of ice tumbling down. Chris pulled his gun and fired uselessly. "We need air support," he yelled into his radio. Static answered. The troll's eyes fixed on Nora again. Its voice boomed across the valley. "You carry our heart. Come to us, and the fire will sleep." Andreas turned to her, horrified. "It's calling you." "I know," she said quietly. She stepped forward. "Nora, don't." Andreas shouted, grabbing her arm. "We can find another way." "There isn't one," she said softly. "They're tied to me now. If I run, they'll destroy everything to find me." Chris limped closer, shaking his head. "You walk to them, and you'll die." "Maybe," she said. "But if my blood called them, maybe my blood can end it." Without another word, she turned toward the ledge and started down the slope. The snow crunched under her boots as she descended toward the colossal figure waiting below. The creature lowered its head, its molten eyes following her every step. The storm raged harder, wind howling like the cries of 1,000 dead. The pendant around her neck pulsed faster, stronger, matching the heartbeat of the trolls around her. Her veins burned beneath her skin, glowing faintly green through the frost. Andreas and Chris watched helplessly as she approached the giant's outstretched hand. It waited, massive, motionless, its palm like a valley of stone. Nora climbed onto it. The creature lifted her gently, raising her to its burning face. "Blood of the Keeper," it rumbled. "End the circle." She looked into its eyes, saw the reflection of a world on fire, and within it, her own face glowing with the same unholy light. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The pendant flared, brighter than ever before. She pressed it to her chest and screamed. The light exploded outward, tearing through the clouds, engulfing the mountain in green fire. For a moment, the world went silent. The giants froze mid-roar. The earth itself seemed to stop turning. Then everything collapsed. The trolls disintegrated, their stone flesh crumbling into ash that scattered into the storm. The mountains cracked apart. The valley imploded. And when the light faded, Nora was gone. Only the pendant remained, cracked, lifeless, half buried in the snow. And from somewhere deep beneath the ground, far below the ruins of the valley, came a faint, rhythmic pulse. A heartbeat. One that didn't belong to the mountain anymore. The storm passed, but the silence that followed was worse. The entire valley, once alive with forests, rivers, and villages, was now nothing but ash and fractured ice. The mountains no longer stood tall, they were broken, hollowed, blackened by fire that had come from within. The smell of burnt earth lingered for miles. Andreas stood at the edge of the devastation, staring down into what was once the heart of Bluffgel. Smoke curled from fissures that stretched endlessly into the ground. He couldn't feel his fingers anymore, but the cold didn't matter. Nothing did. Not after what he'd seen. Captain Chris stood beside him, arm in a makeshift sling, his face drawn in gray. No signal. No survivors, he said quietly. They're all gone. Andreas didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the spot where Nora had vanished, where light had devoured everything. She's not gone, he said, voice hollow. She can't be. Chris turned to him slowly. You saw what happened. She triggered that thing. She made it stop. And whatever she unleashed took her with it. Andreas shook his head, gripping his radio until his knuckles went white. No. You didn't feel it. The energy, it wasn't just destruction. It was transfer. Chris frowned. Transfer. Andreas pointed toward the scorched valley. Those things didn't just die. They merged. Their essence went somewhere. And if the pendant tied them to her, then when it burned out. He trailed off. Chris understood. Then it went into her. Before Andreas could answer, a sound rippled through the valley, low, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The snow at their feet trembled in tiny, circular pulses. Chris froze. Tell me that's the wind. Andreas knelt, pressing his gloved hand against the ground. It was warm. Too warm. It's not the wind, he whispered. The heartbeat grew louder. Then came another sound, a faint, distant voice carried through the air. Nora. Chris's eyes widened. That came from below. Andreas's heart leapt. We have to go down there. You're insane, Chris barked. That whole mountain's unstable. One wrong step and it'll bury us alive. She's alive. Andreas shouted back, his voice cracking. I felt her. For a long moment, the captain said nothing. Then he sighed heavily. You've got 30 minutes before I call evac. After that, I'm leaving you here. That was enough. They descended into the fissure, their floodlights cutting through the smoke and ice. The deeper they went, the stranger it became. The rock was no longer rock, it was something else. Organic. Pulsing. The walls glistened like wet flesh, veins glowing faintly beneath the surface. Chris muttered under his breath, this isn't geology. Andreas ignored him, focused on the faint echo of the heartbeat. It was stronger now, resonating through the air like a slow drumbeat. Then, in the dim light, he saw it, a figure embedded in the wall. A woman. Nora, he breathed. Her body was encased in translucent crystal, her arms outstretched. Eyes closed. But her chest moved, slowly. Breathing. The veins of green light that covered the walls converged at her heart, pulsing in rhythm. Chris raised his gun instinctively. What the hell is that? She's alive, Andreas whispered, stepping closer. She fused with it. The mountain. The trolls. Everything. The light around her flickered. The crystal cracked slightly, and a rush of hot air poured from the fissure. Nora's eyes snapped open. They glowed green. Andreas stumbled back, terrified and awestruck all at once. Nora? Can you hear me? Her voice echoed in his mind rather than through the air. Andreas. He flinched. You're alive. Alive, yes. But not as before. The crystal shattered completely, and Nora stepped forward, her movements slow, deliberate. Her skin was pale, laced with faint, glowing veins. The pendant, once lifeless, was now embedded in her chest, fused to her heart. Chris lifted his rifle. Don't move. Nora looked at him, her expression unreadable. You don't understand. The trolls, they're not gone. They're inside me. Andreas's eyes widened. What do you mean, inside? She closed her eyes. When I broke the pendant, I didn't destroy them. I absorbed them. Their consciousness, their power, it's all here. She pressed her hand to her chest. The mountain breathes through me now. Chris's finger twitched on the trigger. So what, you're one of them? Nora turned toward him slowly. No. I'm something worse. The ground beneath them shuddered violently. The cavern walls began to pulse faster, the green veins flaring bright. Andreas stumbled as the floor cracked open again, revealing glowing magma beneath. Chris shouted over the roar, "You're causing this. I can't control it." Nora screamed. They're waking through me. Her voice layered over itself, human and monstrous at once. The cavern ceiling split open, releasing a column of light that shot upward, piercing the storm above. The sound of stone shifting thundered through the valley again. Andreas covered his head as debris rained down. Nora, stop. She fell to her knees, clutching her head, screaming. They're not gone. They're calling to me. Chris grabbed Andreas by the arm, dragging him toward the exit. We have to leave her. Andreas resisted. No. We can still save her. But as he turned back, he saw her rising, eyes blazing with unearthly light, veins glowing like fire beneath her skin. Her voice echoed through the cavern, deep and resonant. The gods sleep no more. The earth erupted beneath her. The mountain screamed. From the cracks around her feet, colossal silhouettes began to form again, hands, faces, torsos, reassembling themselves from molten stone. But this time, they weren't waking beneath the mountain. They were part of it. And at their center, glowing like a newborn star, stood Nora, half human, half god. Her scream became a roar. And Norway trembled anew. The sun never rose over Norway that morning. The sky churned with black clouds, spiraling in slow, monstrous rotations. Lightning arced across the heavens, illuminating the broken ridges of Bufjell, where the earth itself pulsed like a living organ. The air reeked of sulfur and ash, thick enough to burn the lungs. Andreas staggered through the ruins of the valley, coughing violently. Every breath felt like fire. Behind him, the remnants of the Norwegian defense forces were evacuating the last of the survivors. Their vehicles crawled through mud and debris, headlights slicing through the smoke. But Andreas wasn't leaving. Not yet. He stared up at the mountain, where a pillar of green light now shot miles into the sky, piercing the clouds. It flickered like a heartbeat, steady, deliberate, alive. The seismic readings showed impossible energy levels. The entire mountain range was moving, breathing, shifting as if waking from a 1,000-year slumber. And at its center was her. Nora. God help us, Captain Chris muttered, limping to Andreas's side. His eyes were hollow, his arm wrapped in bloody bandages. It's spreading. That light, it's reaching the glaciers. Everything it touches turns to stone. Andreas lowered his binoculars, trembling. She's not controlling it. It's controlling her. The ground quaked violently, knocking them both to their knees. From the mountainside erupted a colossal arm of molten rock, veins glowing with green light. Then another. The peak split open completely, revealing a face, massive, ancient, carved from stone and flesh. Its eyes burned emerald fire. The Troll King had returned. But it was no longer alone. Hundreds of forms, giant, twisted silhouettes, emerged from the mountain, their bodies fused with the earth, screaming soundlessly into the storm. The mountain itself was alive, its cries echoing across the valley like the roar of 10,000 beasts. And through it all, in the very heart of that unholy birth, stood Nora, levitating amid the chaos, her body wreathed in light. Andreas whispered, "She's the core now." Chris grabbed his shoulder. "If that thing keeps growing, it'll sink half the country. We have to hit it, hard." "With what?" Andreas snapped. "You saw what happened to the last strike. It absorbed everything." "Then we hit the source," Chris said grimly. "Her." Andreas froze. "No. We're not killing her. She's gone, Andreas. Look at her." Chris shouted. "She's not human anymore." But Andreas's mind was already racing. "She said they were inside her. That means there's still a link, a neural bond. If I can reach her, maybe I can pull her back before it's too late." Chris stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You go near that thing, and you'll be dust before you take a step." Andreas met his eyes, voice trembling. "Then I'll die trying." He grabbed the pulse rifle and sprinted toward the mountain. The storm screamed around him, hurling ice and fire in every direction. Rocks exploded from ground like shrapnel. Every step felt like moving through a nightmare, heat, wind, and the bellowing of ancient gods shaking the world apart. At the edge of the crater, he saw her up close. Nora hovered above a lake of molten stone, her hair whipping like smoke, her eyes no longer her own. The pendant's light pulsed with every beat of the mountain's heart. He called out over the roar, "Nora." For a moment, she didn't move. Then her head turned. Her eyes, those once soft, human eyes, flickered with faint recognition. "Andreas," her voice echoed, not from her mouth but from everywhere. He stepped forward cautiously, the heat blistering his skin. "You have to stop this. You're destroying everything." Her voice broke through the thunder. "I can't. They won't let me." "Fight it," he shouted. "You're stronger than them." Lightning struck nearby, and the ground split beneath his feet. He fell to his knees, clutching the rifle. Nora screamed, clutching her chest, as light burst from her body in violent waves. Chris's voice blared through the radio, "Andreas. The warheads are armed. You have 60 seconds before detonation." Andreas froze. "No. Abort. She's still in there." But the signal crackled, then died. The mountain's heart pulsed faster. The air shimmered with energy. Andreas crawled closer, desperate, tears streaming down his face. "Nora. Please. You're not them. You're you. Remember who you are." For a moment, everything went still. The wind died. The light flickered. Nora looked down at him, eyes softening. "Andreas." She reached out her hand. He took it. The instant their fingers touched, a blinding surge of energy tore through him. Images flooded his mind, memories of the trolls, their rage, their sorrow, their endless sleep beneath the ice. He saw what they had been protecting, not a curse, but a warning. They were the mountain's guardians. And humans had woken them. Through the pain, he heard her voice, faint and breaking, "You can end it. But you have to let me go." He shook his head. "No, we can find another way." Tears streamed down her glowing face. "There isn't one." The sky above split open, revealing the descending flare of the missiles. Time slowed. Andreas whispered, "I love you." "I know," she said softly. "Now run." He screamed as the world erupted in light. The mountain exploded, fire, stone, and molten ice tearing the sky apart. The shockwave flattened everything within miles. Then came silence. When the dust settled, Bofjell was gone. Only a vast crater remained, filled with still, black water. Weeks later, Andreas stood at the rim, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. Norway had survived, but barely. The mountain's energy readings were gone. No radiation. No tremors. Just silence. He dropped a small pendant into the lake, the last remnant of Nora's research. It vanished into the depths without a ripple. As he turned to leave, a faint shimmer moved beneath the surface. A pulse. A heartbeat. Then, just for an instant, he thought he heard her voice again, carried by the wind. The mountains never die. And the water rippled, once, softly, before turning still again. End of Troll 2.